So I'm planning some sword comparison videos using swords of similar type and from a similar time, and hopefully trying to see what kind of differences come through. So for example, I have these two, which are small swords slash, especially this one, transitional rapier perhaps. The date from the, let's say, second half of the 17th century roughly to the turn of the century, more or less. These have a lot of similar characteristics, but also are obviously very different. So the goal is to kind of look at them and figure out what these differences are, both aesthetically, both in terms of feel. We will then run the measurements and data for these on the weapons dynamics computer and hopefully see some interesting variations across the spectrum, or maybe not, we'll see, we don't know. Anyway, as I was picking these swords up after a while and comparing them and starting to look at them and figuring out how I want to structure the video, I realized that they're perhaps due for a cleanup. So today none of them is extremely rusty or in dire need, so don't expect any like massive surprises or hidden marks to pop out. But today we're going to clean for early small swords. Okay, here are the swords we're going to be cleaning today. So we're not going to focus a lot on the details or anything. Some of these swords you may have already seen in previous videos, others perhaps not, but they may be in upcoming videos between the time I'm recording this and the time I'm publishing. So it's very likely that you'll have at least already seen a few of these. But to give a general context of what we're looking at 4 small swords, again, slash transitional rapiers, depending on your approach to definitions and how strict you are with them. These most likely are all 17th century, with the possible exception of this one, which may be from the first decade of the 18th century, perhaps. But generally speaking, we're talking about the early phase of small swords. And you can kind of see this in a few of the characteristics of these 3 especially. You see they're lacking a knuckle guard. This is a fairly typical characteristic of early small swords slash late slash shrunken down rapiers, let's say. You'll also see the blade profile is not what you typically would find on small swords. These two have a lozenge section, like a diamond cross section. This one has basically a lenticular cross section. This one has more of a shrunken down rapier blade in a sense. So you have the typical fuller, deep fuller here at the forte with inscriptions and so on and so forth. None of these are the more modern iteration of small swords, which tend to have instead like hollow ground blades or triangular sections or this kind of stuff. So anyway, mid to late 17th century, probably the order of age would be this one the oldest, this one second. This is a bit of a weird one because, well, we'll talk about it in a further video, but it has it could be a composite. The plate here could be later, and this one, as I mentioned, kind of on the edge of the turn of the century. So you'll see that they're not in bad shape at all, but since I'm preparing for a comparison video, I want to have them nice and clean, and you'll see that some of these are starting to show a few signs of rust in a few points. So it's high time for a cleaning, which we are going to do now. Moved them all out of the way because I noticed in other videos that having other swords in the background while I show one tends to throw focus off. They're all quite similar in terms of characteristics. They're around 1 meter, between 1 meter and 1.7, I guess, centimeters, of course. They have similar length hilts, they have similar weight around the half kilo mark. So I think this is the reason why I thought it would be really interesting to compare them. So instead of focusing on the measurements and the specs actually, I just want to kind of maybe introduce each one of them as I clean it. So this is the first one I ended up buying, and it's also one of the first small swords I ever got in terms of proper small swords. I had previously bought the cut steel one and the Alterart Degen, but the other small swords that I had previously were mostly military kind of spadroons more than small swords. So this was one of the first introductions to the world of small swords, and I have to say this is one that kind of made me fall in with the style of sword. I was a little bit biased, you could say, towards small swords. I had the feeling that they might be a little bit of a simple sword, a little bit too... I think I was having all of the typical biases you would expect when people talk about small swords and how they wouldn't hold up to stronger swords and how they're just a court sword. So perhaps even the naming you know, town sword, court sword put me off. And also, I'm not usually a fan of hugely decorated swords. I prefer functionality to style. So I think I had a little bit of a bias against these. But as soon as I picked this one up, I think almost instantly my impressions and feelings towards these changed, because this one actually feels really great in the hand. It's hefty, it has weight to it, it has a killer tip, literally, probably. It has edges that can cut, it has a nice long blade that provides reach. It just feels balanced and beautiful in the hand, to me at least. So yes, this is my first small sword, and probably one I'm not ever going to get rid of because of how it was the catalyst, let's say, for a new appreciation for a kind of sword that I didn't really know. So you'll see that these aren't in need of dramatic amounts of cleaning, but just want to get them nice and oiled. The only issue here is that with the open work you see here on the pommel, oil then kind of gets into the space there, and that's not great. I might need a new sponge, by the way. This one seems to be slightly dirty. And we're back with a new sponge. Forgive the... I'm so used to having really dirty swords that on many of these, even using a muddy sponge basically doesn't really make a huge difference, but I noticed here that that is not the case. So I think these swords deserve something a little bit cleaner. So I already wiped the sword down a little bit, but now we'll pass some oil with the clean side of the sponge. So anyway, as I was saying, this is for me the archetypical, in my collection at least, small sword by now. And while I still have some bias towards like the smaller versions of small swords, like the more court-oriented ones, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of them, but of course that might change too. These, like the quote-unquote transitional rapier kind, absolutely have a place in my heart now. Okay, I think this will be good enough for a preliminary cleanup. We'll just take any paw prints off of the blade, and we can set this aside. Moving on, this is the second one I got. Actually, now I have a doubt if they came together or not, but I think not, because I think I was surprised when I received this one at how similar it felt to the previous one. So if I had bought them together, I would have probably... No, I didn't get them together, I'm sure now. So you'll see this one has a very similar blade. Although potentially this one may actually be hollow ground. Actually, it has a little bit of a concave feel to it, but it still has that lozenge section. This one, as I mentioned, may be a bit of a composite. You'll see the disc here of the hilt. This is not what you would expect on late 17th century or 17th century early small swords. This tends to reflect a bit of a later style. But the blade feels similar to the others enough, and also, of course, the hilt, definitely. The hilt here, the crossguards and the quillins are consistent with what you would imagine on a older small sword. I'm not sure I can get in there on camera, so yes, this one is now in need of some cleaning, I see. So as I was saying, the disc is not typical of the 17th century small sword, but the quillins and the guard part, like the rest of the hilt, definitely could be. So I'm leaning towards a composite of the time, perhaps. Like at some point, maybe someone really enjoyed the blade and hilt, or maybe they didn't have money for a new one. I'm not sure. But this is definitely a replacement. The pommel here we see has this lovely... Yeah, this one we already saw in another video, I think. I'm at the point now where I don't really remember which swords I showed, which ones I didn't. So forgive me for that. I may end up doing a deeper clean later because if I see that my on-camera cleaning skills are not up to par, yeah, I may have to take care of it off camera. What's interesting about looking at these swords in the screen and under these lights is that sometimes you see, like here, traces of kind of grinding or polishing or cleaning, like rough work on them that you would not see normally. You can even see some traces of that on the blade. Here, maybe here it's even more visible. Yeah, here. So that's pretty cool. This one was recently cleaned, and it's actually part of the same lot as the last one we'll see, so the brass one. So this one, having been recently cleaned, should not have rusted any further, I hope. So this will just require a quick pass here. This is the most clear example, I think, of the early type of small sword. So it has all of the characteristics, the asymmetrical rings here for the shell guard. It has these enlargements, decorative. This is also a typical sign. Unfortunately, it's missing the shells, but we can't have everything, I suppose. Just getting some oil there everywhere. And well, most importantly, it's also missing one of the finger rings, so that's also something to note. Finger rings which, by the way, are not completely functional. So the finger does pass through, yes. Well, no, they are functional. But this little tip is kind of a little annoying, the way it's curved. If it were a little wider, it would be more comfortable. You may have noticed that the cleaning is just an excuse to be able to hold them and talk about them a little more. So I may not be doing the most thorough job, but as I mentioned, I'll take care of them later. So this one we could also say is perhaps done. And we then have this one. This one I have not cleaned yet at all. So, I mean, but you can see it's not in the worst state. What's really interesting about this one is that it has inscriptions. So it has this me fecit and zucchini on this side, which is really annoying me at the moment because I've seen multiple zucchini-made blades. Zucchini is a sword maker or blacksmith or sword-making family, let's say a bladesmith family, from Italy, northern Italy, so from the area of Bergamo. And I know I've seen a lot of them because, I mean, the name is not one that you would forget. Yet I can hardly find any information anywhere about them. So it's one of those cases where when you don't need the info, you find it all over the place. And when you finally need it, it seems to elude you. So the writing here, the inscriptions were a little filled with dirt. So getting into that crevice and trying to get them clean, but also don't want to overdo it because they're usually quite delicate. So just want to kind of get the rust off without over working them. So here I'm trying to get on this little splotch of rust here. So we'll use the abrasive side of the sponge. Is it even rust or? Hard to tell. I'll take care of it later then. Anyway, as you can see even here, there's some residue of dirt here in the fuller, but we can see now I think you can see the inscription way more clearly. You see that zucchini there and the me fecit very clearly on this side. So this was also unexpected. This sword came in a sheath, and it came together with the previous one I showed you and with that billhook blade I showed in other videos. And it was hidden. There was no picture of the blade. So it was described as being inscripted with the me fecit zucchini, but there was no picture of the condition of the blade. So this was a little bit of a blind purchase, and I have to say I'm very happy because there really is no defect to it. It's complete, straight, apart from that really minor bend on the tip. Sharp? Perhaps no. The others are sharper, but still a very lovely blade, and I'm very happy to have this inscription here. So I won't be touching the brass here because, well, there's no need to. It's clean. And I think that's it. We oiled all of the swords. I'll be taking care of any details that I may have missed on video off camera, but I just wanted to take a chance to talk about these and the upcoming video in which we're going to look at the actual specs and dynamics of each one of these blades. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon in another sword video. Bye!